Hello and welcome back to Word Wednesday. I'm your host, Paige Goodger, and of course, as always, we have Vix Weir. Hi, Vix.
Hi, Paige. Hey, I'm so excited. This is our third Word Wednesday, and people are loving it, and I love that. And keep up the good work down there in San Diego.
Thank you, I will. So, the word for today is central banks.
Wait, do that again. Do that again. There you go. Awesome. Central banks, my God. All right. Why don't you start with the definition, and I'll tell you what my road rooted definition is.
I will. So the definition that I found most helpful in my research was a central bank is an independent national authority that conducts monetary policy, regulates banks, and provides financial services, including economic research. Its goals are to stabilize the nation's currency, keep unemployment low, and prevent inflation. So, Bix, what is your definition of a central bank?
So, my definition of a central bank is a bailout machine for the evil deeds of the banking system. Every time they get in trouble, which is usually about every 10 to 15 years, they need another bailout. And that's what they created the central bank for originally in 1913. The main purpose of a central bank is to bail out the banks that they serve and literally steal the wealth of humanity, not through necessarily the central bank, but through their member banks that control the central bank. And they have a dual mandate. And the dual mandate is one, to make sure there's price stability. So they don't want any hyperinflation. They just want just enough inflation so that the market says, okay, yeah, we can still keep growing. And the other duty of a central bank is to foster low unemployment. So they want to pump enough money into the system to make sure everybody's employed. And the price stability is just a lie because they literally rig all the commodity markets so the prices never go up as much as they should be based on the amount of money they're printing, which is a hell of a lot these days. That's basically it. It's a bailout machine for criminal bankers is what I would call it. Central banks have the ability to create unlimited money out of thin air because they don't really report to anybody. And that's another problem with the banking system. They said, we're going to set up a central bank to be independent so we're not persuaded by politics, which is complete bullshit. They are persuaded by politics, but it keeps them out of the eye of the people, and it's not transparent at all. We don't know where these quadrillions of dollars that they print are going. So yeah, it's something we need to end, and hopefully we can end it quietly and safely, but I don't think so. I think it's going to be more calamitous. That's a big word.
So if I'm hearing you correctly, the central banks are not part of the governmental system whatsoever.
They are not. They are privately owned. They're privately owned by the member banks. So it's like a club that all the members own the central bank. So JP Morgan, Citibank, HSBC, all the member banks own the central bank because there is some accountability only because Congress can dissolve the central bank with a stroke of a pen because they have, just like banks have a charter to create money at 10 to 1 in the fractional reserve system, the Federal Reserve System works solely at the discretion of Congress because Congress can literally sign a law destroying the Federal Reserve Act of 1913 and voila, there's no more central bank. So they have to at least pretend to be doing the right thing, and they got to make sure that the congressmen get their contributions through the banking system, through private donors, just to keep them alive. It's really corrupt and ugly, but it's what we've been living with for over 100 years now.
It's funny that they're not part of government, but government can dissolve the system itself. Is there an importance that central banks serve, or are central banks pretty much just bad all around?
You can say that the central bank fosters the growth that we've had over the past 100 years by regulating interest rates. That's how they really control everything. Is if they basically regulate the interest rates that the banks get to borrow at. So it's not all bad. And my biggest problem these days is that they're not truthful with the American people or the world. They're saying that they're not giving out bailouts when they are. So basically, they're giving the banks money for all the mistakes they made over the last 10 years, and that's bad. But again, we the people can end this game, the central banking fiat money game, in Congress. All it takes is an act of Congress to remove the charter of the Federal Reserve Bank, and then all the banks around the world would shut down. So it's a big red button if you push it, but in 2008 we almost did push it because everybody got to see how criminal they were in the bets they were making that went sideways. So we'll see what happens this time when the bets go sideways. I think it's coming up the second half of this year.
Yeah, it seems like it's pointing towards that direction. Who is in charge of the central banks?
You know, you could say it's the head of the Federal Reserve System, which is Jerome Powell at the moment. So he was an expert on the Deutsche Bank derivative book, which was a gigantic problem. So that's why he got in there, is because he understood the ins and outs of the derivative market. And that's what's imploding right now in the background. So they thought, oh, well, why don't we put the expert in charge of derivatives as the head of the Federal Reserve System? But who does he really take his marching orders? Theoretically from the president, but not in actuality. I think there is a central bank of central banks, which is called the Bureau of International Settlements, the BIS. And I know it just keeps going and going.
Keeps
and who's in
going.
charge of that? You know, central bankers, the heads of the central bank are in charge of the BIS. And then there's the IMF. These are more like one world order type of institutions. And then above that, there's the big money, royal family, bloodline type stuff, Queen of England, the Rothschilds, the Rockefellers. You go above that, you're into some ET type of stuff. You go above that, you're into the spiritual side. You go above that, you've hit God. So, I mean, there's so many different levels that this battle is going on currently. It's all currently happening on every level. It's an amazing time to be a warrior fighting for truth and honesty, because so much of it is being exposed now. And I think the more we open up the door and tell people about, we red pill the world, the more people are going to say, oh my God, I can't believe I had to live the way I did for so long. That's why I've been so broke and having to work, 50-hour weeks just to feed my family, is because of the fractional reserve banking system that they implemented to keep us literally in chains. So yeah, now's the time to let your free flag fly and fight for freedom.
Yes, always more freedom. To kind of recap, the central banks determine the reserve requirement for big banks like Chase, Citi, and Wells Fargo. And they also create money out of thin air to bail banks out when banks make risky deals or try to invest in something that completely falls through and they lose the people's money. And so the central banks are there to, like, as a safeguard for the big banks' criminality.
That's exactly it. That's well
Okay.
put. It's really the only entity within the United States that has the ability to print money without getting any authorization from anybody, not from Congress, not from the president. Now, people say they can't do that. They have to report in, but in reality, they can do whatever they want because they're not audited. And that's been a big issue with people in the libertarian movement. Like Ron Paul always wanted to get the Federal Reserve audited, because then they can find out who they're really bailing out behind the scenes. So ultimately, at the end of the day, it's this huge debt that gets piled on top of already our massive debts. And ultimately, it falls on the people. Now, a lot of people say, no, that's not our debt. It's the Federal Reserve System's debt. We use the Federal Reserve note as our currency. So the more they print, the less valuable our currency is. Money is interesting because it's all about scarcity. I think we're hitting that time when the people have to stand up. Next time there's a crisis in the banking system and the stock market falls 50%, and they come to Congress like they did in 2008 and say, oh, by the way, we need $20 trillion to keep this going. We need to say no and to start fresh. And it'd be the best thing for the United States because all debt would be erased. But no more house debt, no more credit card debt, no more student loan debt. Of course, all your assets will go away as well, unless you hold them in your own possession, like gold, silver, and cryptos, or your house. You'll have your house. So, yeah, it's we're getting to the point where we got to stand up and say no more.
Yeah, I was discussing this with Josh last night, and we were talking about how we're in a modern day prison system that it's so well oiled. We don't know we're in a prison system, and two, we police each other back into the prison system that we don't know that we're a part of. And so as soon as someone learns the truth or tries to start fighting the system, you have other prisoners that are now acting as guards to police you back into a school of thought that conforms with the current system that everyone is enslaved under. Obviously, our goal on here is to red pill and have people realize, like, hey, you don't have to be a slave and you don't have to be a prisoner. You can work, you can use all of that energy to try to build something new that's not based even remotely in the system that we currently have, because it's criminal. So once people start seeing that criminality, I hope that everyone starts becoming less of a guard and less of a slave and more of their independent, free self. Because once you have a taste of that, you want everyone to live their life like that. You want the opportunity for everybody, or at least I do. So central banks bad, freedom good, cryptocurrency good, being your own bank good.
That was so well said. I agree 100%.
So some key takeaways. A central bank is a financial institution that is responsible for overseeing the monetary system and policy of a nation or group of nations, regulating its money supply and setting interest rates. Central banks enact monetary policy by easing or tightening money supply and availability of credit. Central banks seek to keep a nation's economy on an even keel, but as we know, this is done criminally. A central bank sets requirements for the banking industry, such as the amount of cash reserves banks must maintain via their deposits. And a central bank can be a lender of last resort to troubled financial institutions and even governments, also known as bailouts. So
that's the huge problem, is the central bank. Ultimately, that's why the bankers wanted a central bank, was they wanted to keep all the profits from their good deals and then take all the losses and throw them back on the people. And so they created a central bank to do just that.
criminal activity disguised as good. Inversion. So they invert it. They're like, no, this is really good for the people, and this keeps a certain number of people from going under. But in reality, it's the system itself that is keeping people exactly where they are, and that's why we need to end it and switch to something better that benefits everybody and doesn't just keep us enslaved to this debt system that we're in. So
Bravo.
I think we'll wrap up there for Word Wednesday. And thank you, Bix, for coming on again and sharing your words of wisdom and your experience and expertise on the subject. And we will see you guys all next week for another Word Wednesday. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we look forward to seeing you next week.
I can't wait for it. Very excited.
Awesome. We'll see you then, Bix.
Bye.
Bye.